Dr. Sarah Chen stepped out of the black SUV and looked up at the towering concrete walls of the Blackwater Research Facility. The morning sun barely touched the top of the building, leaving everything below in shadow. She pulled her lab coat tighter around herself as a cold wind swept across the empty parking lot. This wasn't how she had imagined her first day at one of the country's most secretive research facilities would begin. After years of working in regular hospitals and medical centers, Sarah had been handpicked for this position. The letter had been brief and mysterious, mentioning only that her expertise in biochemistry and her spotless record made her perfect for special government research. As she walked toward the main entrance, Sarah noticed how different this place felt from any medical facility she had ever seen. There were no windows on the lower floors, just smooth concrete walls. Security cameras watched from every corner, and she counted at least 3 different checkpoints between the parking lot and the front door. The first guard barely looked up when she showed her credentials. "Dr. Chen," he said in a bored voice, "you're late." Sarah checked her watch. She was actually 15 minutes early. "I think there might be some confusion. My appointment isn't until 9 and it's only 8:45. The guard's partner laughed. "New girl thinks she knows better than us already." He stamped her visitor badge with unnecessary force. "Good luck in there, lady. You're going to need it." The second checkpoint was staffed by a stern-faced woman in military uniform. She examined Sarah's papers for what felt like an eternity, before finally buzzing her through. "Straight down the hall," she said without looking up. "Don't wander off. People who wander off here tend to disappear." Sarah wasn't sure if that was meant to be a joke, but the woman's expression suggested otherwise. The hallway stretched out before her like something from a nightmare. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows on the walls. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the empty corridor, and she found herself walking faster just to escape the unsettling sound. She passed several doors marked with numbers and cryptic symbols, but no signs indicating what lay behind them. Through one slightly open door, she glimpsed people in hazmat suits working with equipment she didn't recognize. Through another, she saw rows of hospital beds, all empty but somehow still threatening. Finally, she reached the end of the hall and found herself in front of a door marked Personnel Office. She knocked and waited. "Come in," called a voice from inside. The office was cramped and cluttered, with papers stacked everywhere and the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. He looked up at Sarah with something between annoyance and resignation. "Dr. Sarah Chen, I presume," he said, not bothering to stand. "I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, Facility Administrator. Sit down." Sarah took the only available chair, moving a stack of files to make room. "Thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Webb. I'm excited to learn more about the research being conducted here." Dr. Webb snorted. "Excited, right?" He shuffled through some papers on his desk. "Let me be clear about something, Dr. Chen. You weren't our first choice for this position, or our second, or our 10th for that matter. You're here because everyone else turned us down or couldn't pass the security clearance." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I see. Well, I'm here now, and I'm ready to work hard and prove myself." "Prove yourself," Dr. Webb repeated, shaking his head. "Do you have any idea what kind of work we do here, Dr. Chen?" "The letter mentioned biochemical research related to national security," Sarah replied carefully. Dr. Webb laughed, but there was no humor in it. "National security, that's one way to put it." He leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "Tell me, Dr. Chen, how do you feel about getting your hands dirty?" "I'm not sure I understand." "I think you do." Dr. Webb pulled out a thick folder and dropped it on the desk between them. "This facility conducts research that most people would find disturbing. We work with subjects that require special handling. We develop treatments and procedures that push the boundaries of medical ethics, and we do it all in service of keeping this country safe." Sarah's stomach began to knot. "What kind of subjects?" "The kind that don't get to ask questions," Dr. Webb replied coldly. "The kind that don't have rights or families waiting for them to come home. The kind that exists solely for the advancement of science and national security." The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah stared at the folder on the desk, afraid to ask what was inside but needing to know. Dr. Webb seemed to enjoy her discomfort. "Having second thoughts already, Dr. Chen? I told you that you weren't our first choice. Maybe you should run along back to your safe little hospital job and forget you ever came here." Sarah straightened her shoulders. She had come too far to back down now, whatever this place was hiding. "I'm staying, Dr. Webb. I signed a contract and I intend to honor it." "Brave words," Dr. Webb said with a smirk. "We'll see how long that bravery lasts. You'll be working in Section C under Dr. Patterson. He'll explain your duties and show you around." He picked up his phone and dialed an extension. "Patterson, your new assistant is here. Come get her." While they waited, Dr. Webb continued to study Sarah with an expression that made her skin crawl. "One more thing, Dr. Chen. In this facility, we have a very clear chain of command. You follow orders without question, you don't ask unnecessary questions, and you absolutely never, under any circumstances, speak to anyone outside this facility about what you see or do here. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because people who break those rules have a tendency to have accidents. Very unfortunate, very final accidents." The door opened and a tall, thin man in a white lab coat entered. He had pale skin, sharp features, and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through Sarah. "Dr. Patterson," Dr. Webb said, "meet your new assistant, Dr. Sarah Chen. I trust you'll show her the ropes and help her understand how things work around here." Dr. Patterson nodded curtly. "Of course, Dr. Chen, if you'll follow me." As Sarah stood to leave, Dr. Webb called out one last warning. "Remember what I said about asking questions, Dr. Chen. Curiosity killed more than just cats in this place." Sarah followed Dr. Patterson out of the office and back into the long, echoing hallway. Her first day at the Blackwater Research Facility was just beginning, and already she was beginning to understand that she had entered a world where normal rules didn't apply, and where the price of knowledge might be higher than she was prepared to pay. Dr. Patterson led Sarah deeper into the facility, through a maze of corridors that all looked identical. The further they went, the more unsettled she became. The walls seemed to close in around them and the air grew thicker with each step. "Section C is where we conduct our most sensitive research," Dr. Patterson explained without looking back at her. His voice echoed strangely in the narrow hallway. "You'll be assisting with patient monitoring and data collection. Nothing too complicated for someone of your limited experience." Sarah bit back a sharp response. She had graduated top of her class from medical school and had 5 years of experience in emergency medicine. Her credentials were far from limited, but she was beginning to understand that in this place, her past achievements meant nothing. They stopped at a heavy metal door marked with a red biohazard symbol. Dr. Patterson pressed his hand against a scanner, and the door opened with a loud hiss. The smell that hit Sarah's nostrils made her gag, a mixture of disinfectant, fear, and something else she couldn't identify but made her stomach turn. "Welcome to Section C," Dr. Patterson said with what might have been a smile on anyone else's face. On his sharp features, it looked more like a grimace. The area beyond the door was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen in a medical facility. It looked more like a prison than a hospital. Long corridors stretched out in both directions, lined with metal doors that had small windows at eye level. Through some of the windows, she could see shadowy figures moving around in small, sterile rooms. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered. "This is where we house our test subjects," Dr. Patterson replied casually, as if he were talking about laboratory mice instead of what Sarah was beginning to realize were human beings. "Each room is equipped with monitoring equipment and can be sealed completely if necessary." They walked past several of the rooms, and Sarah couldn't help but peek through the windows. In one room, she saw a young man sitting on a narrow bed, staring at the wall with empty eyes. In another, a woman paced back and forth like a caged animal. All of them looked thin and pale, as if they hadn't seen sunlight in months. "How long have they been here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Patterson stopped walking and turned to face her. "Dr. Chen, I believe Dr. Webb already explained the importance of not asking unnecessary questions. These subjects are here for important research that serves national security interests. Their comfort is not our primary concern." "But they're human beings," Sarah protested. "They have rights, do they?" Dr. Patterson's cold blue eyes seemed to bore into her soul. "According to our records, these individuals officially don't exist. They have no families looking for them, no jobs waiting for their return, no one who would notice if they simply disappeared. They are the perfect test subjects, completely expendable." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. She had signed up to do medical research, not to participate in what sounded suspiciously like human experimentation on unwilling subjects. They continued walking until they reached a small office at the end of the corridor. The room contained a desk, a computer, and several filing cabinets. The walls were covered with charts and graphs that Sarah didn't recognize. "This will be your workspace," Dr. Patterson said, gesturing to the desk. "Your job is simple. 3 times a day you'll visit each subject and record their vital signs, behavior, and any physical changes you observe. You'll input this data into the computer system and file written reports with me at the end of each day." "What kind of research are we conducting on these people?" Sarah asked. Dr. Patterson's expression darkened. "We are testing various chemical compounds and their effects on human physiology and psychology. Some subjects receive drugs designed to enhance physical performance. Others get compounds that affect memory and cognitive function. Still others are exposed to biological agents to test potential vaccines and treatments. And they haven't consented to any of this? Consent is a luxury we can't afford when national security is at stake," Dr. Patterson replied coldly. "These people have been deemed expendable by authorities much higher than you or me. Your job is not to question the ethics of what we do here, Dr. Chen. Your job is to collect data and follow orders." He handed her a thick clipboard with forms attached. "Here are today's assignments. You'll start with Subject 47 in Room 12 and work your way down the corridor. Each subject should be evaluated thoroughly, and any unusual symptoms should be reported immediately." Sarah took the clipboard with trembling hands. "What if I refuse?" Dr. Patterson laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Refuse? Dr. Chen, you signed a contract that includes severe penalties for breach of duty. More importantly, you've now seen classified government operations. People who see what you've seen and then try to leave this facility rarely make it to the parking lot." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She was trapped here, at least for now. Her only choice was to play along and hope she could find a way out later. "I understand," she said quietly. "Good. I'll be checking on your progress throughout the day. Remember, efficiency is valued here more than compassion. Don't get attached to any of the subjects. They're not pets, they're research materials." Dr. Patterson left her alone in the small office, and Sarah sat down heavily in the chair behind the desk. She looked at the clipboard in her hands and tried to process what she had gotten herself into. These weren't patients in any normal sense. They were prisoners being used for illegal medical experiments. She thought about Dr. Webb's warnings and Dr. Patterson's threats. She was in serious danger, but so were all the people locked up in those rooms. Someone had to document what was happening here. Someone had to be a witness to these crimes. Sarah opened the first file on her clipboard and began to read. Subject 47 was a 23-year-old male who had been at the facility for 8 months. According to his records, he had been homeless when he was picked up, with no family or friends to report him missing. The experiments being performed on him involved testing the effects of sleep deprivation combined with various stimulant drugs. As she read through more files, a pattern emerged. All of the subjects were people who wouldn't be missed. Homeless individuals, illegal immigrants, people with mental illness who had been abandoned by their families. They had been chosen specifically because they were vulnerable and alone. Sarah realized that she was now part of something monstrous, something that went against everything she had sworn to do as a doctor. But she also realized that she might be the only person in this facility who still had a conscience, who still saw these subjects as human beings deserving of basic dignity and care. She stood up and walked to the first room on her list, steeling herself for what she was about to see. As she approached room 12, she could hear someone crying softly inside. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into a nightmare that would change her life forever. Subject 47 was curled up in the corner of his cell when Sarah entered. The young man looked up at her with eyes that seemed far older than his 23 years. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and his hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to focus on her face. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. "Please just let me sleep. I haven't slept in 3 days. I can't think anymore. Everything hurts." Sarah's heart broke as she looked at him. According to his file, he had been given increasingly powerful stimulants to test the effects of prolonged wakefulness on the human mind and body. The results were written in clinical terms on her clipboard, but seeing them in person was something entirely different. "I'm Dr. Chen," she said softly, kneeling down beside him. "I'm here to check how you're feeling. Are you going to give me more pills?" He asked, terror clear in his bloodshot eyes. "I can't take any more. My heart feels like it's going to explode." Sarah looked around the room. There was a camera in each corner, and she knew that everything she said and did was being monitored. She had to be careful, but she couldn't ignore the suffering she was witnessing. "I'm just going to check your pulse and blood pressure," she said, pulling out her medical equipment. As she worked, she tried to offer what small comfort she could. "Try to breathe slowly. In and out." "That's good." His pulse was dangerously fast and his blood pressure was elevated to concerning levels. Sarah made notes on her clipboard, but she also made mental notes of her own. This young man was in serious medical distress and continuing the experiment could kill him. As she finished her examination, Subject 47 grabbed her arm weakly. "What's your name?" he asked. "Your real name?" Sarah hesitated. She wasn't supposed to share personal information with subjects, but something in his desperate eyes made her decide to break that rule. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah," he repeated as if testing the word. "I'm David Martinez. Please remember my name. If something happens to me, please remember that I was a person, not just a number." Sarah nodded, fighting back tears. "I'll remember, David." She moved on to the next room where she found a woman in her 30s sitting motionless on her bed. According to her file, Subject 52, whose real name was Maria Santos, had been given experimental drugs designed to suppress memory formation. The goal was to create a way to make soldiers forget traumatic experiences. But the side effects were devastating. "Hello, Maria," Sarah said gently as she entered the room. The woman looked up with confusion in her eyes. "Do I know you?" she asked. "I feel like I should know you, but I can't remember. I can't remember anything anymore." Sarah's examination revealed that Maria was physically healthy, but mentally she was trapped in a constant state of confusion. She couldn't form new memories, and most of her old ones had been erased. She was like a ghost of her former self, existing but not really living. "I was a teacher," Maria said suddenly, as if the memory had just surfaced. "I taught second grade. The children used to bring me drawings, but I can't remember their faces anymore. I can't remember anything that mattered." Room after room revealed similar horrors. Sarah met teenagers who had been given drugs that altered their personalities, elderly people whose bodies were being used to test experimental surgeries, and children who had been exposed to biological agents to study disease progression. Each subject had a story, a life that had been stolen from them and reduced to data points on a research project. Sarah documented their medical conditions as required, but she also began secretly documenting their stories, their names, and the details of what was being done to them. The worst part was that many of the staff members treated the subjects like they weren't even human. During her rounds, Sarah encountered other researchers and technicians who referred to the subjects only by their numbers, who discussed their suffering in purely clinical terms, and who seemed to feel no empathy whatsoever for the people they were torturing. "How's the new girl working out?" Sarah heard one technician ask Dr. Patterson as she returned to her office at the end of her first day. "She's too soft," Dr. Patterson replied. "I saw her talking to Subject 47 like he was a real person. She'll either toughen up quickly or she'll become a liability. Should we be worried about her?" "Not yet, but we'll keep an eye on her. Dr. Webb is already concerned about her asking too many questions. If she becomes a problem, we'll handle it the same way we handled Dr. Rodriguez last month." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had wondered why the position she was filling had become available so suddenly. Now she was beginning to understand that her predecessor might not have left voluntarily. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment trying to process everything she had seen. She thought about calling the police, but she realized that a facility this large and well-funded couldn't exist without government approval at the highest levels. Who could she trust? Who would believe her? She also thought about trying to simply quit and walk away, but Dr. Patterson's threats echoed in her mind. She had seen too much to be allowed to leave easily. And even if she could escape, what would happen to David and Maria and all the other subjects? Who would speak for them? Who would remember their names? Over the following weeks, Sarah fell into a routine that felt increasingly surreal. During the day, she performed her duties as required, collecting data and filing reports on the human experiments taking place around her. But at night, she began keeping her own secret records. She memorized the real names of as many subjects as she could learn. She documented the specific experiments being performed and their effects. She began drawing maps of the facility and making notes about security procedures and staff schedules. Sarah didn't yet know what she was going to do with this information, but she knew that someone needed to bear witness to what was happening at the Blackwater Research Facility. These people deserve to have their stories told, and their suffering deserved to be acknowledged. What she didn't know was that her activities hadn't gone unnoticed. Dr. Patterson had been watching her carefully, and he was beginning to suspect that the new doctor might be more trouble than they had anticipated. Soon Sarah would discover that in a place where human lives were expendable, asking too many questions could be a fatal mistake. But she would also discover that she wasn't the only one at the facility who was hiding secrets. The Blackwater Research Facility had many dark corners, and in one of those corners someone was conducting experiments that made everything else look tame by comparison. 3 weeks into her assignment at Blackwater, Sarah had developed a routine that helped her cope with the horrors she witnessed daily. She would arrive early before most of the other staff and use the quiet time to prepare herself mentally for what lay ahead. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions during working hours and save her grief for the privacy of her apartment. On this particular morning, Sarah noticed something different. There were more security guards than usual, and they seemed nervous about something. She overheard fragments of hushed conversations about a security incident and unauthorized access, but whenever she came near, the talking stopped. Dr. Patterson was waiting for her in her office when she arrived, and his usual cold expression had been replaced by something that looked almost like anger. "Dr. Chen," he said without preamble, "we need to talk." Sarah's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course. What can I help you with?" "There have been some irregularities in your reports," Dr. Patterson said, studying her face carefully. "Some of the other staff have noticed that you spend more time with the subjects than is necessary for data collection. You've also been asking questions about procedures that don't concern your duties." "I'm just trying to be thorough," Sarah replied. "I want to make sure I'm doing my job correctly. Is that so?" Dr. Patterson moved closer to her desk. "Tell me, Dr. Chen, what do you think would happen if someone were to document activities here that they weren't authorized to document? What would happen if someone were to attempt to contact outside authorities about classified research?" Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze. "I imagine that would be a serious breach of security protocol." "It would be much more than that," Dr. Patterson said quietly. "It would be treason. And we all know what happens to traitors in wartime." The threat was clear, but something in Dr. Patterson's manner suggested that this conversation wasn't just about her. Someone else had been caught doing exactly what Sarah had been doing, and she had a feeling she was about to find out what had happened to them. "Dr. Chen, you're going to accompany me to a special section of the facility today," Dr. Patterson continued. "Consider it part of your continuing education about the important work we do here." They left Section C and walked through parts of the facility that Sarah had never seen before. The corridors here were even more sterile and secure than the areas she was familiar with. They passed through multiple checkpoints, each requiring different security clearances and biometric scans. Finally, they arrived at an area marked Section X, authorized personnel only. Dr. Patterson pressed his palm to a scanner and spoke into a voice recognition system. The massive steel door opened with a sound like a bank vault. The air inside was different, thicker, with an underlying smell that reminded Sarah of a morgue. They walked down a short hallway and stopped in front of a large observation window that looked into what appeared to be an operating room. "I want you to see something, Dr. Chen," Dr. Patterson said. "This is where we conduct our most advanced research." Sarah looked through the window and felt her knees go weak. On the operating table was a person. She couldn't tell if it was a man or woman because their head was covered, but they were clearly alive. Machines monitored their vital signs while several people in surgical gowns worked around them. "What are they doing?" Sarah whispered. "Advanced neurological research," Dr. Patterson replied casually. "We're studying the effects of direct brain stimulation on memory, personality, and behavior. The applications for interrogation and psychological warfare are limitless." Sarah watched in horror as one of the surgeons inserted what looked like a long needle directly into the subject's exposed brain. The person on the table convulsed violently despite being restrained. "This is torture," Sarah said, unable to keep the revulsion out of her voice. "This is science," Dr. Patterson corrected. "And this is what happens to people who ask too many questions about our work." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" Dr. Patterson gestured toward the operating table. "Meet Dr. Elena Rodriguez, your predecessor. She made the same mistake you seem to be making. She became too attached to the subjects and started asking uncomfortable questions. She even tried to smuggle out some documents about our research. The figure on the table moved slightly, and Sarah could see enough of the face to confirm that it was indeed a woman, probably in her 40s. Her eyes were open, but they stared blankly at nothing. She's been here for 6 weeks now, Dr. Patterson continued. We're using her to test various procedures for memory modification and behavioral control. So far, we've successfully erased most of her memories and replaced them with false ones. She now believes she's a voluntary research subject who signed up to help advance medical science. Sarah felt sick. You're going to do the same thing to me? That depends entirely on you, Dr. Chen. Dr. Rodriguez forced our hand by attempting to expose classified research. You, on the other hand, still have the opportunity to prove your loyalty and dedication to this project. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the horrific procedure taking place on the other side of the glass. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing and what it meant for her own survival. There's something else I want you to see, Dr. Patterson said finally. They walked to another observation window further down the hall. This room was different. It looked more like a luxurious office than a medical facility. Behind a large desk sat a man in a military uniform with multiple stars on his shoulders. That's Commander Harrison, Dr. Patterson said. He's the overall director of the Blackwater Project. Everything we do here is under his direct orders. Sarah studied the man through the window. He appeared to be in his 50s with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He was speaking on the phone, but she couldn't hear what he was saying. The commander has been running this facility for over 10 years, Dr. Patterson explained. He's responsible for some of the most advanced research in human enhancement and psychological warfare ever conducted. The subjects you work with in Section C are just the beginning, a proving ground for techniques that will eventually be used on a much larger scale. Larger scale? Sarah asked. Population control, Dr. Chen. Imagine being able to modify the behavior and memories of entire communities. Imagine being able to eliminate dissent and rebellion before they even begin. The work we do here isn't just about national security. It's about social engineering on a global level. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of what she was learning. This wasn't just a rogue research facility conducting illegal experiments. It was part of a much larger conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and military command. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Dr. Patterson smiled his cold smile. Because, Dr. Chen, you're about to make a choice. You can continue to do your job quietly and professionally, asking no questions and documenting only what you're told to document. Or you can follow in Dr. Rodriguez's footsteps and find yourself on the wrong side of our research. He handed her a new clipboard with different assignments. These are your new duties. You'll be working directly with some of our most sensitive subjects, people who have information that the commander needs. Your job will be to monitor their condition during enhanced interrogation and memory modification procedures. Sarah looked at the clipboard with trembling hands. The subjects listed weren't homeless people or forgotten individuals. These were names she recognized from news reports. Political activists, journalists, whistleblowers who had disappeared over the past several months. I can't do this, she whispered. You can and you will, Dr. Patterson replied firmly, because the alternative is joining Dr. Rodriguez on that operating table. And I promise you, Dr. Chen, that's not an experience you would survive with your mind intact. As they walked back toward Section C, Sarah's mind reeled with everything she had learned. She was trapped in a nightmare that was far worse than she had ever imagined, and escape seemed impossible. But she had also gained valuable information that could potentially bring down the entire operation if she could find a way to get it to the right people. The question was whether she would live long enough to do anything with what she now knew. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah lived in a state of constant fear and moral anguish. Her new assignments required her to assist with procedures that were clearly torture, disguised as medical research. She monitored the vital signs of journalists and activists while they were subjected to experimental drugs and psychological manipulation techniques. Each day was worse than the last. She watched as Marcus Thompson, a whistleblower who had exposed government corruption, was systematically broken down through a combination of sensory deprivation and hallucinogenic drugs. She witnessed the slow mental destruction of Linda Vasquez, an investigative reporter who had been asking uncomfortable questions about military contracts. The most devastating case was James Wright, a human rights lawyer who had been representing families of people who had disappeared. Sarah was forced to monitor his condition as Commander Harrison personally supervised sessions designed to extract information about his clients and then erase his memories of ever helping them. Sarah documented everything she could without being caught. But she felt helpless to actually help any of these people. The security around Section X was too tight, and she was constantly watched by Dr. Patterson and his staff. It was during her third week of working with the high-priority subjects that Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She was updating files in her office late one evening when she heard voices in the corridor outside. Most of the staff had gone home, but someone was having what sounded like an argument near her door. Sarah quietly moved closer to listen. "The timeline has been moved up," she heard Dr. Patterson say. "The commander wants Operation Mindbridge to begin within the month." "That's impossible," replied a voice she didn't recognize. "We haven't finished the testing protocols. The subjects in the preliminary trials are showing severe complications." "The commander doesn't care about complications," Dr. Patterson responded coldly. "He's received new orders from Washington. They want the technology deployed immediately." Sarah's blood ran cold. Operation Mindbridge sounded like the large-scale population control program that Dr. Patterson had mentioned weeks earlier. "But sir," the unknown voice continued, "if we release the aerosol compound now, we could be looking at massive civilian casualties. The memory modification chemicals haven't been properly calibrated. Instead of just making people compliant, we could cause permanent brain damage or death on a massive scale." "That's acceptable losses," Dr. Patterson said. "Besides, the commander has his own reasons for wanting this operation to proceed quickly. He's been conducting some unauthorized research of his own, and he needs to create enough chaos to cover his tracks." "Unauthorized research? What kind of unauthorized research?" There was a long pause before Dr. Patterson answered. "Let's just say that the commander has been using facility resources for personal projects that go well beyond our government mandate. He's been selling our research data to foreign buyers and conducting experiments for private military contractors. If the wrong people in Washington find out about his side business, this entire operation could be shut down." Sarah felt her heart racing. Commander Harrison wasn't just running illegal experiments for the government. He was also selling secrets to foreign enemies and using the facility for his own profit. "How much does Washington know?" the unknown voice asked. "Too much," Dr. Patterson replied. "That's why Operation Mindbridge has to happen now. Once we deploy the aerosol compounds in major population centers, the resulting chaos will make it impossible for anyone to investigate what really happened here. The commander will disappear with his profits, and the rest of us will claim we were just following orders." The voices began to fade as the two men walked away, but Sarah had heard enough. She now understood that she wasn't just witnessing isolated war crimes. She was watching the final preparations for what amounted to a chemical attack on American civilians. Sarah sat in her office for a long time, trying to process what she had learned. The scope of the conspiracy was even larger than she had imagined. Commander Harrison wasn't just a rogue military officer conducting illegal experiments. He was a traitor who was planning to attack his own people to cover up his crimes. She knew she had to act, but she also knew that any attempt to expose the conspiracy would likely result in her death. Still, she couldn't stand by and watch millions of innocent people be subjected to untested chemicals that could kill them or permanently damage their minds. Over the next few days, Sarah began to carefully gather evidence of everything she had learned. She used her access to different sections of the facility to map out the layout and identify key personnel. She documented the chemical compounds being developed and the planned deployment methods for Operation Mindbridge. Most importantly, she began to search for proof of Commander Harrison's unauthorized activities. If she could find evidence that he was selling secrets to foreign buyers, she might be able to use that information to stop Operation Mindbridge. Sarah's opportunity came when she was assigned to work late one evening in Section X. Dr. Patterson had left early for a meeting, and most of the security staff was focused on a training exercise in another part of the facility. For the first time since arriving at Blackwater, Sarah found herself with relatively unsupervised access to the most classified areas. She made her way to Commander Harrison's office area, which she had seen through the observation window weeks earlier. The corridor was empty and she could see light coming from under his office door. She pressed her ear against the door and heard the sound of typing and occasional phone conversations. Sarah waited in a nearby supply closet for over an hour until she finally heard the commander's office door open and his footsteps moving away down the corridor. She waited another 10 minutes to make sure he was gone, then carefully approached his office. The door was locked, but Sarah had learned basic lock-picking skills during her college years when she had volunteered for a charity that helped homeless people get into abandoned buildings for shelter. It took her 15 minutes of careful work, but she finally managed to get the door open. Commander Harrison's office was exactly as she had seen it through the window, luxurious and imposing, with expensive furniture and military memorabilia covering the walls. But what interested Sarah most was the large safe in the corner and the computer on his desk. The computer was still logged in, apparently in violation of basic security protocols. Sarah quickly began searching through the files looking for anything that could prove the commander's illegal activities. What she found exceeded her worst fears. The computer contained detailed records of transactions with buyers from China, Russia, and North Korea. Commander Harrison had been selling not just research data, but actual biological weapons and chemical compounds developed at Blackwater. He had also been conducting private experiments on subjects kidnapped from other countries, experiments that had nothing to do with American national security and everything to do with developing weapons for the highest bidder. Sarah found financial records showing that Harrison had made millions of dollars from these illegal sales. She also found communications with foreign agents discussing plans to use Blackwater's research to develop weapons for use against American targets. Most shocking of all, she discovered that Operation Mindbridge wasn't actually authorized by Washington at all. Commander Harrison had created false orders and forged documentation to make it appear that the operation had government approval. In reality, he was planning to use the chemical attack to create chaos that would allow him to escape with his profits and disappear. Sarah quickly copied as many files as she could onto a small flash drive she had hidden in her medical kit. She was so focused on downloading the evidence that she almost didn't hear the footsteps in the corridor outside. She froze as she heard Commander Harrison's voice talking to someone just outside the office door. He was returning much sooner than she had expected, and she was trapped in his office with no way to escape without being seen. Sarah quickly shut down the computer screen and looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. The office had very little furniture, and most of it was too small to conceal a person. Finally, she spotted a large curtain covering what appeared to be a window behind the commander's desk. She slipped behind the curtain just as she heard a key turning in the office door. Her heart pounded so loudly that she was sure it could be heard throughout the room. The timeline for Operation Mindbridge has been accelerated again, she heard Commander Harrison say as he entered the office with someone else. We deploy in 72 hours. Sir? That's not enough time to evacuate our people from the target cities, replied a voice that Sarah recognized as Dr. Patterson. Our people are expendable, Harrison replied coldly. What matters is creating enough chaos to cover our extraction. I've already transferred the final payments from our foreign buyers and my transport out of the country is arranged. What about the staff here at Blackwater? What about me? Harrison laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. Dr. Patterson, you've been useful, but you know too much about my private operations. I'm afraid you won't be leaving this facility alive. Sarah heard a sound like a struggle, followed by a heavy thud. She pressed herself against the wall behind the curtain, terrified of what was happening just a few feet away from her. Security, Harrison spoke into his phone. I need a cleanup crew in my office immediately. Dr. Patterson has had an unfortunate accident. Sarah realized that she had just witnessed a murder, and that she was now trapped in a room with a killer who would certainly kill her too, if he discovered her presence. She held her breath and tried to remain completely motionless as she heard footsteps moving around the office. She could only hope that Commander Harrison would leave again before his security team arrived to dispose of Dr. Patterson's body. If they found her hiding behind the curtain, she knew that she would be the next person to have an unfortunate accident. The evidence on the flash drive in her pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She now had proof of everything: the illegal weapons sales, the unauthorized experiments, the planned chemical attack on American civilians, and now murder. But she had to survive the next few minutes before any of that evidence would matter. Sarah remained frozen behind the curtain for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. She listened as Commander Harrison made several phone calls, arranging for the accelerated timeline of Operation Mindbridge and coordinating his escape from the country. Each word confirmed that the chemical attack would begin in less than 3 days. Finally, she heard Harrison leave the office, telling someone in the corridor to handle the Patterson situation quietly. Sarah waited another 10 minutes before carefully peering out from behind the curtain. Dr. Patterson's body was gone, but there were still wet spots on the carpet where someone had tried to clean up bloodstains. Sarah felt sick, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. She had the evidence she needed, but now she had to find a way to get it to people who could stop Operation Mindbridge. Getting out of the commander's office was easier than getting in had been, since Harrison had left the door unlocked for his cleanup crew. Sarah made her way back through the facility, trying to look like she belonged there despite her racing heart and shaking hands. Once she reached her own office, Sarah sat down and tried to think clearly about her options. She couldn't call the police. Commander Harrison had contacts throughout local law enforcement. She couldn't contact the FBI directly because she had no way of knowing how high up the conspiracy reached. For all she knew, Harrison's government contacts might include people in federal agencies who would simply warn him that someone was trying to expose the operation. Sarah realized that her best option was to contact the media. If she could get the information to multiple news outlets simultaneously, it would be much harder for Harrison and his allies to suppress the story or eliminate everyone who knew about it. She spent the rest of the night carefully composing a detailed report of everything she had witnessed at Blackwater. She included information about the illegal human experiments, the planned chemical attack, Commander Harrison's foreign weapons sales, and Dr. Patterson's murder. She copied all of the evidence from the flash drive and prepared multiple packages for different journalists and news organizations. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work, the first time she had missed a day since arriving at Blackwater. Instead of going to the facility, she drove to the nearest large city and began implementing her plan to expose the conspiracy. She visited multiple internet cafes and used public computers to send encrypted emails to investigative journalists at major newspapers and television networks. She mailed physical copies of the evidence to backup contacts at different news organizations. She even uploaded copies of the most damaging files to secure servers that would automatically release the information if she failed to check in within a certain time frame. Sarah knew that once she released this information, her life would be in extreme danger. Commander Harrison and his allies would do everything possible to eliminate her before she could testify or provide additional evidence. But she also knew that millions of innocent people would die or suffer permanent brain damage if Operation Mindbridge proceeded as planned. By late afternoon, Sarah had contacted over a dozen different news outlets and activist organizations. She had provided them with enough evidence to verify her claims and stop the chemical attack if they acted quickly. Now she had to hope that at least some of them would take the information seriously and begin investigating immediately. Sarah returned to her apartment and waited. She didn't dare go back to Blackwater, since Commander Harrison had probably realized by now that someone had been in his office. She was sure that he would figure out it was her eventually, especially once the news stories began to break. She didn't have to wait long. The first news report appeared on a cable television channel that evening, just 18 hours after she had first contacted them. The story was initially buried in the late-night news, but by the following morning it had exploded across every major network. Secret government facility conducting illegal human experiments, read the headline on the morning news show. Whistleblower reveals plot to attack American cities with experimental chemicals. Sarah watched from her apartment as reporters described the evidence she had provided. They showed photos of the Blackwater facility and interviewed experts who confirmed that the chemical compounds described in Harrison's files could indeed cause mass casualties if released into population centers. Within hours, federal agents were surrounding the Blackwater research facility. Sarah watched live television coverage as FBI teams and military personnel moved in to secure the building and arrest the staff. But even as she watched the raid unfold, Sarah knew that Commander Harrison would not be caught easily. He had been planning his escape for months, and he had resources and contacts that would help him disappear. Her fears were confirmed when the evening news reported that Commander Harrison had not been found at the facility. According to FBI sources, he had apparently fled the country in the early hours of the morning, just as the first news reports were beginning to air. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration. The immediate threat of Operation Mindbridge had been stopped, and the surviving victims at Blackwater would finally receive proper medical care. But the man responsible for years of torture and murder had escaped justice, and he was still out there somewhere with millions of dollars and dangerous knowledge that he could sell to America's enemies. Over the following days, Sarah gave testimony to federal investigators and congressional committees. She provided additional evidence and helped identify other facilities that might be conducting similar research. The scandal grew larger as more details emerged about the scope of the illegal programs that Harrison had been running. Sarah also learned the fate of many of the subjects she had tried to help during her time at Blackwater. David Martinez, the young man who had been subjected to sleep deprivation experiments, was recovering in a military hospital, but would likely suffer permanent psychological damage. Maria Santos, the teacher whose memories had been erased, would need years of therapy and might never fully recover her identity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Sarah's predecessor who had been subjected to brain experiments, was in a specialized medical facility where doctors were trying to reverse some of the damage that had been done to her mind. The prognosis was uncertain, but she was alive and slowly beginning to remember fragments of her previous life. Many others had not been so fortunate. Sarah learned that dozens of subjects had died during the years that Harrison had been running Blackwater, and their bodies had been disposed of in ways that made identification difficult or impossible. 3 weeks after the raid on Blackwater, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. The caller identified himself as Agent Morrison from a joint FBI-CIA task force that was tracking Commander Harrison's international activities. Dr. Chen, Agent Morrison said, "We need your help. We've discovered that Harrison didn't just escape. He's actively working with foreign intelligence services to establish new research facilities overseas. He's using the knowledge and contacts he gained at Blackwater to help America's enemies develop biological and chemical weapons." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What kind of help do you need from me?" "We believe Harrison is planning to establish a new facility, possibly in Eastern Europe or Central Asia. We need someone who understands his methods and can help us identify his operations. We need someone who has seen his work firsthand and can recognize the signs of his involvement." Sarah realized that her ordeal was far from over. Commander Harrison was still out there, still conducting his evil experiments and still posing a threat to innocent people around the world. The evidence she had gathered and the courage she had shown in exposing Blackwater was just the beginning of a much larger battle. As she prepared to join the international manhunt for Commander Harrison, Sarah thought about all the people whose lives had been destroyed by his ambition and greed. She thought about David and Maria and Elena and all the others who had suffered in the name of his twisted version of science. She had already risked everything to stop him once. Now she would have to risk everything again to make sure he never hurt anyone else. 6 months later, Sarah found herself in a cold, unfamiliar city in Eastern Europe, working undercover as part of Agent Morrison's international task force. The hunt for Commander Harrison had led them across 3 continents and through a network of shell companies, corrupt officials, and black market weapons dealers. Sarah had spent months learning new identities and surveillance techniques, but her most valuable skill remained her ability to recognize the signs of Harrison's experimental methods. She had studied his techniques so thoroughly during her time at Blackwater that she could identify his work from subtle details that other investigators might miss. Their current lead had brought them to Prague, where intelligence sources suggested that Harrison was establishing a new research facility disguised as a private medical clinic. Sarah's job was to infiltrate the clinic as a consulting physician and gather evidence of illegal activities. The Meridian Medical Center looked legitimate from the outside, a modern building in an upscale district with professional signage and what appeared to be normal medical operations. But Sarah's trained eye immediately noticed details that suggested something more sinister was happening inside. The security was too sophisticated for a simple medical clinic. The staff moved with military precision that reminded her of Blackwater. Most telling of all, she recognized some of the specialized equipment being delivered to the building, the same type of neurological monitoring devices that had been used in Section X. Sarah spent 2 weeks working at the clinic, gradually gaining access to different areas and building trust with the staff. She documented everything she could without arousing suspicion, but she was careful not to make the same mistakes that had nearly gotten her killed at Blackwater. Her breakthrough came when she was assigned to assist with a special consultation in the clinic's basement level. She was told that a wealthy private client was funding experimental treatments for neurological conditions, and that discretion was absolutely essential. When Sarah entered the basement facility, she felt like she was stepping back into her worst nightmare. The layout was almost identical to Section X at Blackwater. Sterile corridors lined with observation rooms, each containing a single bed and monitoring equipment. But what she saw in those rooms was even worse than what she had witnessed at Blackwater. The subjects weren't homeless people or political prisoners, they were children. Young people who appeared to be between the ages of 12 and 16, all unconscious and connected to machines that Sarah recognized as advanced brain monitoring and modification equipment. Sarah's hands shook as she reviewed the medical charts she was given. The children had been obtained from orphanages and refugee camps across Eastern Europe. Their files indicated that they were being used to test new techniques for memory, implantation and behavioral modification, techniques that would create perfect soldiers who could be programmed with any mission and would follow orders without question. As Sarah worked to document the horrific experiments, she gradually became aware that she was being watched. One of the senior staff members, a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Kozlov, seemed to be studying Sarah's reactions carefully. "You seem troubled by our work here, Dr. Chen," Dr. Kozlov said during a break between procedures. "Is there something about our methods that concerns you?" Sarah forced herself to remain calm. "I'm just trying to understand the full scope of the research. These techniques are quite advanced." Dr. Kozlov smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. "Yes, they are. Our director has developed revolutionary approaches to human enhancement. Perhaps you would like to meet him." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had a terrible feeling that she was about to come face to face with Commander Harrison himself. Dr. Kozlov led her through another series of security checkpoints to an office suite that occupied the entire top floor of the building. The luxury and military decorations were unmistakable. This was definitely Harrison's operation. "Dr. Sarah Chen," a familiar voice said from behind an enormous desk. What a pleasant surprise. Commander Harrison looked older than he had at Blackwater, with more gray in his hair and new lines around his eyes. But his cold, calculating expression was exactly the same. He studied Sarah with the same predatory intensity she remembered from their brief glimpse through the observation window months earlier. "Commander," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I didn't realize you were involved with this clinic." Harrison laughed. "Oh, Dr. Chen, let's not pretend we don't know exactly why you're here. Did you really think you could infiltrate my operation without me recognizing you? I've been watching your every move since you arrived in Prague." Sarah realized that her cover had been blown from the beginning. Harrison had known who she was and had been playing with her, letting her see just enough to understand the scope of his new operation before revealing himself. "The question now," Harrison continued, "is what to do with you. You've caused me considerable inconvenience with your little whistleblowing stunt at Blackwater. It took me months to re-establish my operations and rebuild my network of contacts." "You're experimenting on children," Sarah said, abandoning any pretense of maintaining her cover. "How can you justify torturing innocent kids?" "Justify?" Harrison stood up and walked around the desk to face her directly. "Dr. Chen, I don't need to justify anything to anyone. I am reshaping the future of human warfare and social control. These children will become the foundation of a new generation of enhanced soldiers and intelligence operatives. They will be perfect weapons, completely loyal, absolutely obedient, and entirely without conscience." Sarah felt sick as she listened to Harrison's casual description of his plans. "They're not weapons. They're human beings with lives and families and futures." "Not anymore," Harrison replied coldly. "Thanks to my research, they will become exactly what I programmed them to be. And speaking of programming, Dr. Chen, I have some special plans for you." Harrison nodded to Dr. Kozlov, who produced a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Sarah recognized it as one of the sedatives that had been used on subjects at Blackwater. "You see, Dr. Chen, I've been developing some new techniques since our time at Blackwater. Instead of simply eliminating troublesome individuals, I can now reprogram them to serve my purposes. You're going to become one of my most valuable assets, a former whistleblower who will publicly recant her testimony and help me discredit the investigation into my activities." Sarah backed toward the door, but found it blocked by two security guards who had appeared silently behind her. She was trapped, just as she had been at Blackwater. But this time there was no curtain to hide behind and no lucky breaks to save her. As Dr. Kozlov approached with the syringe, Sarah made a desperate decision. She pulled out the emergency transmitter that Agent Morrison had given her and pressed the activation button. The device was designed to send a distress signal and GPS coordinates to the task force, but Sarah wasn't sure if they would be able to respond in time to save her. "How thoughtful of you to call for help," Harrison said, apparently unconcerned by Sarah's action. "Unfortunately, your rescue team will arrive to find that Dr. Sarah Chen has had a complete change of heart about her previous allegations. You'll tell them that you made everything up, that you were suffering from mental illness, and that Commander Harrison is actually a patriotic American who was unfairly persecuted." The guards grabbed Sarah's arms as Dr. Kozlov moved closer with the syringe. Sarah struggled desperately, but she was outnumbered and overpowered. She closed her eyes and thought about all the people she had tried to help: David Martinez, Maria Santos, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, and now the children in the basement who would never have a chance at normal lives if Harrison's plan succeeded. Just as the needle was about to pierce her skin, Sarah heard the sound of explosions and automatic gunfire from somewhere below. Agent Morrison and his team had arrived, and they were fighting their way through Harrison's security forces. The guards released Sarah and rushed toward the sounds of battle, leaving her alone with Harrison and Dr. Kozlov. This was her chance, possibly her last chance, to stop the man who had caused so much suffering. Sarah lunged toward Dr. Kozlov and grabbed the syringe, turning it toward Harrison. "It's over, Commander. Your operation is finished." Harrison smiled one last time. "No, Dr. Chen, this is just the beginning. I have facilities like this one in a dozen countries, and I have buyers lined up for everything I can produce. You may stop me here today, but my work will continue." As federal agents burst through the office door, Sarah realized that Harrison was probably right. The battle against his network of illegal research and human experimentation was far from over. But for the first time since she had walked into the Blackwater research facility, Sarah felt like she was finally winning. The children in the basement would be rescued and given the medical care they needed to recover from their ordeal. Harrison would face justice for his crimes, and Sarah would continue to use her knowledge of his methods to help track down and shut down his remaining operations around the world. She had been belittled and threatened, had witnessed unimaginable horrors, and had risked her life repeatedly to expose the truth. But she had also saved countless lives and struck a major blow against one of the most dangerous criminals of her generation. As she watched Commander Harrison being led away in handcuffs, Sarah thought about the long road ahead. There would be more investigations, more testimony, and probably more dangerous undercover missions. But she was no longer the frightened young doctor who had walked into Blackwater 6 months earlier. She had found her courage and her purpose, and she was ready to continue the fight for as long as it took.